So who wins the Guaranteed Rate Bowl? The Golden Gophers or the Old Gold and Blue? I'll let you know what I think at the end. What is up, college football fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Coos, and welcome to another edition of Coos' Corner, your go-to channel for college sports, with a heavy dose of these West Virginia Mountaineers. Before I get into the topic of the show, I want to ask that if you haven't yet, please hit the red subscribe button. I try to do college sports videos almost every single day. Share this with your friends, please. And if you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button for me if you don't mind. Now let's get on with the show. Now let's go over the odds of the game. ESPN has Minnesota as a 61.3% favorite, West Virginia with a 38.7% chance, and then Vegas has Minnesota at -4, and the over/under on the game is 45. This is going to be a game for people who like defense. If you're a person who likes offense and offensive firepower and high-scoring games, this is not the game for you, because these are two teams whose defenses have basically carried them this season. One team with a good defense, the other team with a great and maybe even on the border of an elite defense. And I'm going to put the team stats up to show you what I mean. Let's look at points per game. West Virginia is at 26.8, Minnesota is at 26.1. Points allowed per game, West Virginia is at 24, Minnesota is at 18. Total yards, West Virginia 384.8, Minnesota 360.3. Yards passing, West Virginia is at 257, Minnesota is at 166. Yards rushing, West Virginia is at 128, Minnesota is at 194. Yards allowed, West Virginia 350, Minnesota 285. Passing yards allowed, West Virginia 220, Minnesota is at 185. Rushing yards allowed, West Virginia is at 130, Minnesota is at 100. So as you can see there, those defensive stats, much better than the offensive stats for both of these teams, especially Minnesota. You look at Minnesota, they are top 10 nationally in 4 of those categories that I just read you. They're 9th in the country in points allowed per game, 4th in the country in yards allowed per game. They're 10th in passing yards allowed per game and 9th in rushing yards allowed per game. So 4 major categories on the defensive side of the ball, Minnesota's in the top 10. It's going to be a tough day for this West Virginia offense. Conversely, West Virginia is also not a bad defense either. The numbers, if you look nationally, they're not quite as good, but as a West Virginia fan, I've seen every West Virginia game, and the defense has by far been the bright spot of the team this year. They have given up some big plays. They don't force a lot of turnovers, but they seem to always step up and make plays when they need to. Now, some team stats that aren't necessarily on this list that are going to make a difference. 2 I want to focus on. First, let's look at turnover margin. Minnesota is +4 on the year in turnover margin, and then West Virginia is a terrible -7 on the year. Big reason for that -7 of West Virginia, Jarret Doege has thrown a lot of interceptions this year as number 1. They have given up a lot of fumbles on the year as well. And then conversely, the defense doesn't force a lot of turnovers either. So that's the reason for that -7. In Minnesota, their quarterback Morgan has thrown a few interceptions, not as many as Doege, but for the most part they protect the football and play mistake free. That's the reason for that big difference in turnover margin between the two teams. The other stat that I think is going to be a big difference in this game is time of possession. Both of these teams like to possess the ball longer than their opponents. Minnesota especially, they are averaging over 35 minutes a game in time of possession. They're definitely a run-heavy team. They love to grind out games and hold on to the football as much as possible. West Virginia likes to do that as well. They've not been as successful at it this year as Minnesota just because they've not been as good in the run game. But they do like, especially in the second half of games, they do like to burn clock and keep that ball as long as possible and try to win that time of possession battle. As good as Minnesota's defense is, they don't cause a lot of negative plays. They don't force a lot of turnovers. They don't get a lot of sacks. And they don't have that many tackles for loss. West Virginia is 30th nationally with 6.6 tackles for loss per game. Minnesota is 120th. It's actually only 3.9 tackles for loss per game. So as good as their defense is, they're not going to wow you with big plays necessarily. They're just very fundamentally sound. They tackle well. They don't miss assignments very, very often. Kind of reminds you of a Bill Snyder coach team in the Kansas. When Bill Snyder coached at Kansas State, they don't beat themselves. They make you beat them. And then they don't have a lot of sacks. They have 20 sacks on the year. West Virginia's got 26, so West Virginia has a slight advantage there. And then red zone D, West Virginia's better. West Virginia's actually tied for 11th nationally in red zone defense. Their opponents are only scoring 73% of the time in the red zone, whereas Minnesota, their opponents are scoring 85% of the time, which is good for 74th nationally, which is not very good. Now, offensively, some key stats: sacked. Minnesota's only given up 20 sacks on the season, where West Virginia has given up 33 sacks. So there's another area where Minnesota has an advantage on the Mountaineers. And that goes to show that the big reason for that, in my opinion, is just this great offensive line for Minnesota. They have one of the best offensive lines in the country. Week going into the Wisconsin game, which was our last game of the season, Pro Football Focus had rated Minnesota's offensive line as the 6th best in the country. They've got a right tackle, especially. His last name, I think, is Fa'alele. I hope I didn't butcher that last name. The kid is 6'9", 380 pounds, and he's an absolute beast. He's hard to get around. He's a big body, and he's athletic for his size. But he's the anchor of that offensive line. But the whole offensive line is good. All 5 starting offensive linemen made all Big Ten, either first, second, third, or honorable mention. And then they have a tight end also who comes in blocking situations a lot, named Co Kieft. He also was an honorable mention all Big Ten performer. So they've just got really good blocking up front, which has been really necessary, and I'll explain that in a minute. But to show you how good that offensive line is, I dug really deep into some stats, and I found a stat called stuff rate. And what stuff rate is, it basically measures how often your running backs gain positive yardage, or how often they don't get stopped at the line of scrimmage or lose yardage. And in that category, Minnesota is ranked 10th in the country, which means that their running backs pretty much gain yardage on every carry. It may not be 10, it may not be 20, but they get at least 1 or 2 yards on every single carry, just about. Now let's go to some player stats. Obviously, we've got the quarterbacks. You've got Jarret Doege at West Virginia, who's 254 for 386, which is a 65.8% completion percentage, 2,908 yards, 19 touchdowns, but he has 11 interceptions. And then you've got Tanner Morgan for Minnesota, 141 out of 236, 1,935 yards, 10 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. 59.7% completion percentage for him. You've got 2 veteran quarterbacks who've played a lot of football. Both of them probably underperformed. If you'd ask their fan base, Morgan's completion percentage wasn't all that great, and he probably threw a few too many interceptions based on how many times he threw the ball. And then you got Doege. Those 11 interceptions and being sacked 33 times are just really the 2 things that really aggravate West Virginia fans and have them really wanting more. Because if you look at the touchdowns and the yards, it's there, and the completion percentage is not terrible, but just too many interceptions, too many sacks for Doege. And now you look at the running backs. Leddie Brown has been the major back for West Virginia this year. He carried the ball 223 times for 1,065 yards, 13 touchdowns for an average of 4.8 yards a carry. But it's in doubt whether Leddie will play in this game or not. He is a senior. He's planning on moving on. And he put a tweet out before the last game of the season saying this was his last dance. So that kind of caused me to assume he's not planning to play in the bowl game. Now, if he doesn't play, Tony Mathis will probably step in and start. Mathis' stats on the season: 59 carries, 256 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, 0 touchdowns. But those stats are a little deceiving because Mathis didn't play a whole lot early on because of injury, and they kind of worked him in slowly, so he didn't get a whole lot of carries early on. Really, the last couple of games of the season, he got most of his work, and he actually gained over 100 yards against Kansas in the last game of the season. Now, I understand it's Kansas, but he looked really good in that game. And Mathis is actually a little twitchier even than Leddie is. He can break tackles like Leddie, but he also has a little twitch about him that Leddie probably doesn't have. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Mathis. If he is the go-to back in this game, I'm really looking forward to seeing how he can step up and take that mantle and be the guy for the Mountaineers in the backfield. Now, for Minnesota, man, it's been a heck of a year for them in the backfield. Minnesota lost their top 3 running backs on the depth chart to season-ending injuries this year. First, Ibrahim went down in the first game of the season against Ohio State. He's out for the year. Then their second string back come in. I think his name was Potts, came in. He played a couple games, and he got injured for the season. And then another gentleman came in, and I'm sorry his name has escaped me, but He played a couple games, and then he was out for the season. But so they've been relying the last few games on two true freshmen. The statistical leader of the two is Kai Thomas. He's got 145 carries for 680 yards, average of 4.7 per carry, and 5 touchdowns. And then Marquise Irving, 114 carries, 570 yards, 5.0 average per carry with 4 touchdowns. But like I said, both those guys are true freshmen. Now both of them were 4-star recruits coming into the season, but they were forced into action a lot earlier than Coach Fleck wanted them to. But they are quick. I've watched some film on these guys. They're very fast, very quick, can really hit the hole fast, and they're shifty. So West Virginia's defense is going to have to be ready and really break down and be fundamental in their tackling to stop these guys. And in receiving, West Virginia's leading receiver is Winston Wright Jr., 60 receptions, 672 yards, 5 touchdowns, average of 11.2 yards per catch. And then Ottman Bell, can't remember, don't know his first name. His last name's Ottman Bell, 35 receptions, 490 yards, 6 touchdowns, average of 14 yards per catch. That shows you he's a big play receiver. And then who's really impressed me for Minnesota in the receiving game is their tight end, Brevin Spann-Ford. Spann-Ford has caught 23 passes for 296 yards and a touchdown. The cat plays on almost every snap, from what I can tell. Went back and watched a few game clips and game films on Minnesota, and Brevin Spann-Ford is a huge part of their offense, and very impressive to me. Minnesota's not going to do anything fancy offensively. It looks football. They just come right at you. Nothing fancy. They just try to beat you man hat on hat and beat you one-on-one. That's how they play football. And the offenses, they've seen mixed results this year, but like I said, you can chalk a lot of that up probably to those key injuries they've had in the backfield, because their offensive line is stout. And to me, that's really been the difference that's helped their offense to have the success that they have had. And that's led them to an 8-4 team, an 8-4 record. Now, some players that weren't on that list, on the defensive side of the ball, you've got, first for West Virginia on the defensive side of the ball, you've got Josh Chandler-Semedo, who was their senior linebacker, 104 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 1.5 sacks on the year. Not sure if Chandler-Semedo plans to play in the game or not. He is a senior. So, I really hope he plays as a West Virginia fan, because he's a big difference maker. And then up front, Dante Stills, defensive tackle. He's also a senior, but he does plan to play. 6 sacks, 32 tackles, and an interception on the year. Dante's really he's a first-team All-Big 12 performer. He's in the backfield a lot. Has been all season. Now on Minnesota's defense, you've got defensive back Tyler Nubin, who's got 3 interceptions and 41 tackles on the year. Their best defensive lineman is probably a gentleman by the name of Boye Mafe. He has 6 sacks, 30 tackles, and a forced fumble. And then their linebackers, Gibbons and Sori Marin, have 86 and 82 tackles respectively. And I tell you what, watching Minnesota, their defense, they like to change things up. They'll go to a 3 down front, then change to a 4 down front. And they've got a guy whose last name is Rush. He's number 8. He's actually a defensive lineman, but they will stand him up a lot between the nose tackle and the defensive end. And a lot of times he'll rush, and a lot of times he'll drop back into coverage. So they really love to mix things up, try to keep the opposing offenses off balance. They don't blitz a whole lot from what I can tell, but they do like to blitz on 3rd and short a lot. Another key player for West Virginia that won't be in this game is starting tight end TJ Banks. He's entered the transfer portal. Now Banks, he was not the starting tight end in the beginning of the season, but West Virginia starting tight end TJ O'Laughlin went down with an injury, season-ending injury. So Banks stepped in, played really well for the Mountaineers. Was really critical in the last 2 games of the year and their wins, but for whatever reason he's decided to move on and finish his career somewhere else. So the next man up is going to be a 3rd-string tight end for West Virginia. So how much will that hurt them, we'll see. And then I want to touch on special teams for a minute, because I do think special teams will play a factor in this game. West Virginia has a slight edge in field goal kicking. Their field goal kicker, Casey Legg, has made about 80-some% of his kicks, whereas Minnesota's kicker has made about 65 or 66% of his kicks. But the biggest thing that, to me, that is to keep an eye on is punt return. West Virginia is 125th nationally in punt return yards, which is terrible. It's near the bottom. On the other hand, Minnesota is 11th nationally in punt return defense. So they're really good at defending the punt return game. And to add fuel to the fire, or add insult to injury, however you want to put it, for West Virginia, Their starting punt returner, Isaiah Esdale, has also entered the transfer portal, so he won't be available for this game. So West Virginia is going to have someone back there returning punts that may not be a newbie at it necessarily, but has not done it a whole lot. And you playing a team against Minnesota who's really good at covering punts, could be a long day. I hope whoever it is gets a lot of work in, a lot of practice in before this game, because a muff punt could be the difference in this football game, as close as these two teams are statistically. Now you look at the keys to victory for each team. Let's start with West Virginia. West Virginia needs a win at the line of scrimmage on defense. They're going up against arguably the best offensive line they faced all year. That defensive front, while it is the strength of West Virginia's defense, maybe even the whole team, they're going to have their work cut out for them against Minnesota. They need to win that battle up front. Offensively, they need to protect the football. Like I said, time of possession is going to be critical in this game. So there's not going to be a whole lot of possessions. So when you do get possessions, you can't give them up. So West Virginia needs to protect the football. And then they need to be balanced on offense. They need to run probably open up the playbook a little bit, run some trick plays maybe, run some things that Minnesota hasn't seen on tape. And in my opinion, they need to give Garrett Green, the backup quarterback, who's good with his feet, they need to give him some more snaps in this game. Try to utilize his ability in the run game, especially if Leddie doesn't play, to add another dimension to that offense. And then for Minnesota, they need to get pressure on Jarret Doege on the defensive side, because Jarret Doege will turn the ball over and make mistakes if he's under pressure. So if Minnesota can get pressure on him, then he's prone to make mistakes and or take a sack. And then on offense, Minnesota just needs to do what they do and run behind that big talented offensive line they have. Give the ball to Thomas and Irving. Let those guys work. Let them protect Tanner Morgan and let them do what they do. And just establish the run game behind that big offensive line. Now my prediction for this game, as hard as it is for me to do this, I really want to pick West Virginia to win this game, and they can win the game. But when I look at the matchup and how good Minnesota's defense is, and how undisciplined West Virginia has played at times this year, I can't help but pick Minnesota to win this game. I think Minnesota wins the game 24-21. I don't think they cover the 4-point spread. I think it's really tight, but I think they control time of possession a little better. West Virginia will probably turn the ball over at least one time to give Minnesota an extra possession, and I think that could be a difference. Special teams could be a difference, and I think Minnesota wins the game 24-21. They hit the over/under of 45 right on the button. So there you have it. Let me know in the comments what you think of my score prediction. Do you think I'm dead on the money, or do you think that I'm off? Let me know your prediction. And then also, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button. And if you like this video, like my breakdown, please give me the thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to share it. Also, there's a link in the description box that takes you to the Fanatics website if you want to purchase some sports apparel with your favorite team. Also, if you like preview videos, here's a preview for the Michigan-Georgia game right here. If you want to check it out, I appreciate you tuning in. Until next time.